Each player controls a goalie plus a forward on the other side.
Whoa! Look at Hunt! Look at him!
Reveals your subconscious feelings in a myriad of breath.
Not only was it difficult to grow up impoverished in the 1970s, but it also molded resiliency, inventiveness, and a profound appreciation for the small things in life. Children who had to make the most of every meal and use secondhand clothing and damaged shoes were taught the true meaning of resourcefulness. These experiences shaped character, whether it was using tape to mend broken toys or making games out of household tasks. Being broke did not equate to being broken, as anyone who has experienced it would know. Come along as we examine 25 things only children who were raised in poverty in the 1970s. Remember, unlike today's 24/7 media, television had boundaries, and for poor kids, that static-filled screen marked the end of another day. After a long evening of watching whatever was available on their few channels, the station's sign-off came. The screen would display the American flag while the national anthem played, followed by a test pattern or pure static. This was the signal that it was officially time for bed. Without cable or late-night programming, the house would suddenly feel eerily quiet, leaving kids with nothing but their imaginations or the distant sound of a parent's snoring. The hustle was more than just a dance for impoverished children in the 1970s. It was a social event, a way to blend in, and a free moment of pure joy. Inspired by the disco craze, kids learned the twirls, glides, and spins by watching TV shows like Soul Train or by imitating older siblings who had perfected the moves. School dances, block parties, or even a simple living room with a record player became makeshift dance floors, with bell-bottoms swaying and platform shoes, or whatever hand-me-down sneakers were available, tapping to the beat. The hustle was a way to shine without spending a dime. Their best toy was imagination, and the $6 Million Man inspired them endlessly. Without costly action figures or high-tech devices, children became their own bionic heroes, running in exaggerated slow motion while making ch-ch-ch sound effects like Steve Austin. Playground races turned into dramatic bionic sprints, and some even made makeshift bionic implants out of cardboard or tin foil.
We'll have to check his eye. Bionic eye, A-OK. $6 Million Man, ready for action.
New Bionic transport and repair stations sold separately.
Proudly displaying their cybernetic enhancements. Pretending to be bionic was a free and exciting way to feel superhuman, and in a world where money was tight, a little slow-motion running gave children the impression that they could accomplish anything. The hypnotic, glowing lamps with their slow-moving blobs of colored wax felt like a piece of science fiction sitting on a bedroom nightstand, but for many kids, actually owning one was out of reach.
The oil is lighter than the water, that's why it goes up, and the water carries the oil.
So they admired them in stores, at a richer friend's house, or in the background of TV shows. Those who did manage to get one, often second-hand or as a rare gift, treated it like treasure, watching the mesmerizing shapes swirl for hours. In a world without smartphones or limitless entertainment, the calming motion of a lava lamp was a simple yet magical escape from everyday struggles. Everyone had macrame decor, whether they liked it or not. Macrame plant hangers with their elaborately knotted patterns hung in front of windows, holding spider plants or pothos, while woven wall hangings gave wood-paneled living rooms a boho feel. Many families could not afford to buy expensive decorations, so macrame became a popular do-it-yourself project.
You also take the middle cord, move to the right. When tying the double half-hitch knot from left to right, the cords are tied counterclockwise.
That allowed mothers and grandmothers to make their own using inexpensive rope or twine. Some children even took art classes at school and brought home crooked wall hangings or keychains as proud presents for their parents. Macrame, whether produced by hand or purchased from a store, added flair and inventiveness to even the most basic dwellings in the 1970s. Hula hoops were the ideal toy, because they were affordable, long-lasting, and incredibly entertaining. These vibrant plastic hoops, whether purchased from a bargain store or inherited from older siblings, offered hours of entertainment in living rooms, playgrounds, and backyards. The true pros could spin the hoop around their arms, neck, or even ankles, but it was a rite of passage to learn how to keep it spinning around the waist.
Relax the shoulders, and if you're an adult, do not be surprised. Kids will always be.
Children competed spontaneously to see who could spin the longest, and some even attempted to roll them down the street like enormous wheels. Hula hoops were an easy, inexpensive way to brighten any child's day, because they did not require batteries, and there were no restrictions to follow. An inexpensive and enjoyable method to add color to their attire was using tie-dye shirts. Many children and their parents used inexpensive dye and rubber bands to transform faded old t-shirts into psychedelic works of art, because purchasing new clothing was not always an option. Anxiously waiting for the shirts to dry before removing the swirls and patterns, summer afternoons were spent dipping them into buckets of vibrant hues. Every shirt felt like a unique fashion statement because no two designs were ever the same.
Then here's the scrunch dye shirt. You'll notice this one bleached to a red color. That's the fun part about bleach tie-dye, is you never really know what.
Some children even proudly displayed their do-it-yourself abilities by wearing their creations to school. Tie-dye shirts were a hip, inexpensive fashion that was always in vogue, whether they were made at home, in camp, or at a community gathering. What basic plastic toy had kids spinning, whirling, and competing for hours while they were all decked up in their vibrant creations? If a family could not afford a brand new beanbag chair, they might have a hand-me-down with flattened stuffing or even a homemade version filled with whatever soft material was available. These squishy, shapeless chairs fit anywhere, whether in a small living room, a tiny bedroom.
And Marcus is 4 foot something, so this is definitely big enough for him, and even adults obviously too.
Or a shared space with siblings. Sitting in one meant sinking deep into a cozy, almost unavoidable pit, perfect for reading comic books or watching Saturday morning cartoons. Over time, many beanbags developed leaks, leaving mysterious little foam beads scattered across the floor, but that did not stop kids from plopping into them after a long day of play. Slinkies were among the most fascinating and annoying toys available to impoverished children in the 1970s. These coiled plastic or metal springs could walk downstairs with a nearly mystical motion when they were functioning properly. Many children cheered when the Slinky made it to the bottom step without getting tangled.
Knock, knock. But once you open it up, it actually plays. Slinky, and it's Slinky time. Keep my lights moving from end to end.
Having spent hours trying to get the ideal rhythm. In actuality, however, after only a few days of fervent play, the majority of Slinkies were bent, twisted, or hopelessly knotted. Kids had to get inventive and use the stretched-out toy as a makeshift bracelet or telephone cord if a family could not afford to repair a damaged one. A Slinky added excitement to an otherwise dull afternoon, despite its fleeting beauty. Bell-bottom jeans were more than just a style. They were a need, frequently worn until the hems frayed and the fabric thinning. Many kids relied on hand-me-downs or thrift store finds since they could not afford frequent shopping trips, and they occasionally wore jeans that were too big or small. Some children's parents were inventive and sewed in additional fabric panels to make the legs broader if they were not sufficiently flared. Wear and tear was transformed into a fashion statement by using vibrant embroidery or iron-on decals to patch up holes. Even though they were not exactly brand new, bell-bottoms were a must-have, whether they were worn with a faded t-shirt or a hand-me-down polyester shirt. Bold and colorful outfits were popular, but what household item gave many bedrooms from the 1970s a hypnotic, groovy feel? Owning an Atari video game machine was the ultimate status symbol for impoverished children growing up in the 1970s. It was a rare luxury that not all families could afford. Those who were fortunate enough to own one typically purchased it used with a small assortment of cartridges that were played incessantly. Living rooms were transformed into makeshift arcades.
There we go. 4-3 instead of 16-9. Forget that noise.
By the straightforward but incredibly addictive games like Pong, Space Invaders, and Asteroids. Finding a friend who had an Atari and was excitedly awaiting their turn to play was the next best thing for kids without one at home. Some even used inventive strategies, such as bartering for more playtime, doing chores, or trading toys. Whether you had one or only dreamed of having one, the Atari signaled a new, exciting, and futuristic era of home entertainment. Everyone wanted to play Simon, the captivating high-tech game that not everyone could afford. Players had to accurately repeat the pattern as 4 large, colored buttons lit up in a sequence as part of this electronic memory test. Those who were fortunate enough to own one quickly became the talk of the neighborhood.
The pace, you follow right along. Light the lights that Simon lights, or he'll tell you that you're wrong. Simon's a computer.
With friends congregating to take turns. Without their own Simon, children frequently spent their free time at a friend's house or sneaking in a few rounds at a department store display model. Players were given the impression that they were managing cutting-edge technology, thanks to the game's futuristic beeping sounds and flashing lights. Even with limited funds, losing yourself in Simon's hypnotic sequences was an experience that will never be forgotten. If they ever experienced a waterbed, it was the ultimate novelty. Although acquiring one was a rare privilege, these sloshing, unsteady beds felt futuristic. Sometimes, hand-me-down versions with sluggish leaks that required continuous patching were given to families who could not buy them.
There? Why are you so scared of everything?
We're Mickey.
Get out there!
Turning over felt like riding a miniature ocean wave because every movement generated ripples throughout the mattress, making sleeping on a waterbed an uncertain night. Some children enjoyed simply resting on one while visiting relatives or sneaking a bounce on a neighbor's bed. A waterbed brought some excitement to an otherwise unremarkable bedroom, whether it was a status symbol or a used purchase. The family's one rotary phone served as both a lifeline and a source of annoyance. It was typically placed on a small table or mounted on the kitchen wall, and it had a long, tangled cord that was barely long enough for a private conversation. Making a phone call required patience, but what TV-inspired fantasy had kids running in slow motion and making robotic sound effects?
Then remove the receiver and listen for the dial tone. It sounds like this.
If a friend called, a strict parent might answer and question them first, and if the line was busy, you just had to try again later. If they could get in, roller disco parties were the best way to spend a weekend. Not everyone could afford the admission fee or a brand new pair of skates, but skating rinks with their flashing lights and thumping disco beats felt like a dream world. Many children used skates that were handed down to them or borrowed from a friend, stumbling onto the ground while listening to Donna Summer and the Bee Gees. Some were forced to settle for improvised driveway discos, where they skated on cracked sidewalks while listening to the newest music on a portable radio. Even for a few hours, the delight of moving to the music overcame everything else, whether it was through graceful gliding or awkward stumbling. The idea of mood rings was intriguing, but frequently unattainable. With the help of their color-changing magic, these tiny trinkets claimed to be able to identify emotions based on body temperature. Black for, well, probably a broken ring, green for normal, and blue for calm.
It's the most amazing man-made jewelry ever created. The original multicolor mood ring. This is the ring that senses your deepest feelings. Scientifically developed, the incredible chromostone.
Children who could not afford the original could find imitations at toy stores or gas stations, but they frequently quickly lost their mood-reading skills. As a rare treat, some turned to borrowing, trading, or pleading with their parents for one. Gazing at the stone, attempting to alter its hue, and displaying the outcome to friends was an alluring novelty. In a world with few comforts, mood rings offered a small, mystical thrill, even if they were not always accurate. For many, Pong was their first, and perhaps only, experience with video games. The simple, two-dimensional game of bouncing a square ball between two paddles felt like futuristic magic. If a family was fortunate enough to own an Atari console, it was typically a used device connected to an outdated TV with clumsy dials.
You're watching the most exciting game you will ever see on your TV set. Telstar by Coleco, with 3 different games. Telstar Tennis, with digital scoring.
Friends would congregate, sharing the bulky controllers, enthralled by the slow, hypnotic gameplay. For those without a console, playing Pong meant smuggling in turns at a friend's house or begging for a quarter at an arcade. Since new clothes were a rare treat, tube socks were an easy way to add some style to an otherwise worn-out wardrobe. Holes were inevitable, but resourceful parents simply darned them.
That we've been procrastinating and not doing. Right. And then 2 weeks in, you know, the minute one stressful thing happened.
Or had kids wear mismatched pairs until they completely fell apart. Tube socks, typically white with bold stripes in red, blue, or yellow, were a necessity for kids growing up poor in the 1970s. And they were often bought in bulk because they were inexpensive and durable. Whether playing outside, riding bikes, or going to school, those striped socks were a defining feature of the time. For those without fancy tape decks, a pencil was the ultimate tool, manually twisting the reels to save battery life. Whether you were making mixtapes from radio recordings or replaying a single song endlessly,
occurring when your Walkman is bouncing around while you're water skiing and listening to a book on tape.
Cassette tapes were a poor kid's treasured possession. Unlike bulky 8-tracks or expensive vinyl records, cassettes were portable and relatively inexpensive, making them a go-to for music lovers on a budget. However, finding the exact spot on a tape to replay a favorite song, that was a test of patience. Even swimming in lakes or deep pools felt dangerous, with imaginations running wild. Poor kids who could not afford fancy vacations did not mind skipping the beach. After all, staying on land felt much safer after Spielberg's masterpiece of terror. Entertainment frequently came from borrowed VHS tapes, Saturday night TV, or watching a movie at a friend's house. When Jaws hit the screens in 1975, it did not just terrify audiences, it created a generation of kids too scared to step into the ocean. With no cable, streaming, or on-demand TV, Saturday morning cartoons were a sacred ritual, one of the few free indulgences. Kids would get up before the sun came up, pour a bowl of generic cereal, and park themselves in front of the family's old, sometimes feisty television. They would adjust rabbit ear antennas or slap the TV to fix the static. These animated adventures offered an escape from everyday struggles.
Oh, you dadu?
Hey, Pop, can we stay up past 10? Can we watch the adult channel? Hello?
Transporting kids into colorful worlds of mystery, humor, and fun. By noon, the magic was over, and reality, chores, errands, and hand-me-down clothes came rushing back. While kids were lounging in front of their favorite cartoons, what fashion trend was popular frequently pulled all the way up to their knees. Pet rocks were both a dream and a frustration for poor kids growing up in the 1970s. While their wealthier classmates proudly displayed their smooth little stones in cardboard boxes with breathing holes, impoverished kids had to get creative and find their own pet in the backyard, wash it off, and draw a face on it with a marker. Despite this, the desire to fit in was strong.
Make sure you play with your pet rock, because it will make them happy.
And some kids found ways to trade, borrow, or even make their own versions. The pet rock craze was entertaining, but for those on a tight budget, it was just another reminder of what they could not afford. If kids could persuade their parents to buy them a rock and treat it like a pet, what other pop culture phenomenon had them completely rethink their surroundings, especially when it came to the ocean? If they could get their hands on a pair, platform shoes were the pinnacle of fashion. These tall shoes, with their thick soles and striking patterns, were very popular, but it was not always possible to purchase them brand new. A lot of children had to rely on secondhand goods, thrift stores, or even slightly larger shoes that were borrowed from older siblings.
The platform. I do like the chunky heel. and I like the silhouette.
Although it was difficult to walk in them, ankles wobbled, and a few slips and falls were painful and hilarious, the cool factor made the danger worthwhile. Platforms, whether worn with bell-bottoms or a gaudy disco ensemble, gave children the impression that they were walking down the street in a scene from Saturday Night Fever. Despite their shortcomings, 8-tracks were a gateway to music, allowing kids to escape into tunes even when money was tight and record players were out of reach. Despite their bulky cartridges, which were often passed down from older siblings or purchased used,
by George Eash, and those Fidela packs lived a much longer life than the stereo.
8-track players blasted everything from disco to rock with a distinctive K-chunk sound between tracks. There was no rewinding, so if you missed your favorite song, you had to wait for the loop to come back around. Poor kids often had a limited selection, whatever albums their parents or relatives could afford, so they played the same tapes repeatedly until the sound warped.